Thank you, Morten, Kjaerum, for coming to the Autumn Academy here in Oxford and for chairing a session of the Academy on the evolution of the international framework and the international human rights framework applying to irregular migrants. What were, according to you, the main points and issues that were raised, and how the international framework was presented in a way to regulate the situation of irregular migrants in Europe?
First of all, it has been a very rich discussion we have had with a very good group of people, both from the academia, civil society, from the governments. So a number of different perspectives were presented, which is always important on issues which are as complex as this one is. And I would say that there were sort of two strands in the discussion. The one strand was the complexity. I mean, that the complexity of the situation on the ground that one of our speakers laid out extremely well, sort of what are the different categories of irregular migrants, those who are overstayers, people coming in irregularly, etc., etc. So that complexity on the ground, which is important to understand, so we're not trapped in stereotypes, the one or the other stereotype of these persons. And then the next step was then the legal framework of this. I mean, how do human rights play in? And I started out myself by reminding people that the uniqueness of human rights, and that is that it goes for everybody. It's no matter whether one have residence permit, citizenship, or whatever, we have human rights because we are human beings, and let's have that as the outset. And I think that framework is important to recall. And then we, of course, when that is said, then the difficult thing starts of how do we still regulate the specific situation in relation to access to health, education, etc. So that was sort of, let's say, one important part of the discussion. And then someone raised, said, well, listen, when we look at the figures, I mean, it's manageable. I mean, it's not that many people when it comes to it. With 500 million Europeans, shouldn't we be able to cope with this? So there was sort of another strand that I found it very important in the discussion, is this a proxy discussion? Is it actually because we find it more difficult to discuss what do we do with all the converging of the new technologies, which may render hundreds of thousands of people unemployed, the climate change, all these really big discussions, difficult discussions that we sort of say shy away from a little bit, and then we have this proxy discussion about the other. So all our fears in relation to a future which is unknown because of technologies, climate change, we project onto the other, the refugee, the irregular migrant, etc. And that is, of course, a very important, extremely important discussion to have, because if it is a proxy discussion, which it is to some extent, not 100%, but to some extent it is, one should be sort of discuss it in a different way. And in that regard, it was also mentioned, why is it that we so rarely address race, the race issue? Is that an element? The class issue? Is that another element? Etc. So I think there was a nice attempt to widen the discussion from just what we see, the person approaching the border, or a person without documents, or a person overstaying his or her visa, staying on in an irregular manner, and then to something bigger. And I'm afraid that we cannot avoid that bigger discussion in times to come in order really to get a solid development on this in Europe.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.